You've been told your whole life to trust people, to give them the benefit of the doubt, to assume good intentions until proven otherwise. Nobody told you the price of that assumption. Most men only understand what manipulation actually costs them long after the damage is done, when the pattern is already finished and all that's left is the aftermath. If you're the kind of man who takes people at their word, who second-guesses his own gut feeling before he second-guesses theirs, who apologizes when something feels off just to avoid seeming difficult, this is going to offend you. Because by the end of this, you'll understand why the men who never learn to read manipulation are the first ones cornered, the first ones drained, and the last ones to realize it happened at all. You were taught that honesty is the default setting of most people, that suspicion makes you the bad guy, that a good man extends trust first and asks questions later, if he asks them at all. Trusting easily feels warm. It feels like decency. And it might be the single most expensive assumption you will ever carry into a room. The Stoics understood something about this centuries ago. Not that trust is foolish in itself, but that trust without verification is an open door, and open doors get walked through by exactly the people who are watching for them. When you never question motives, people stop worrying about being caught. When there's no risk of being caught, there's no restraint. And when there's no restraint, your good nature stops being a virtue and becomes a resource to extract from. They didn't romanticize human behavior. They observed it without flinching. And their conclusion was uncomfortable. A man who assumes others share his own good faith will eventually be undone by the ones who don't share it at all. That isn't cynicism. That's just watching closely enough to see the pattern before it repeats on you personally. And if your first reaction is, I don't want to become suspicious of everyone I meet, good. You shouldn't. Suspicion isn't the goal, and it was never the point. Literacy is the point. Learning to read manipulation the way you'd learn to read a contract isn't about becoming cold or guarded with everyone. It's about no longer being illiterate in the one language that con artists, narcissists, and everyday users of people speak fluently, while everyone else in the room is still reading the situation at face value. Here's the trap almost nobody sees until it's already worked on them. The less you understand how manipulation actually functions, the more invisible it becomes to you while it's happening. And the more invisible it is, the more room it has to move, to compound, to repeat itself in slightly different clothing until it becomes the shape of an entire relationship, an entire job, an entire decade. Stop for a second and think about the last time someone made you feel guilty for a boundary you never should have had to defend in the first place. Think about the last time you apologized first in an argument you didn't start, just to lower the temperature in the room. Did that bring you any real resolution, or did it quietly teach the other person exactly which lever moves you, and how little pressure it takes to move it? Manipulation rarely looks dramatic when it's actually happening. It looks like a slightly too fast, I'm sorry you feel that way, which sounds like an apology and functions like a dismissal. It looks like someone rewriting a conversation you both just had, confidently enough that you start doubting your own memory of it. It looks like praise that arrives suspiciously close to a favor being asked. It looks like guilt, dressed carefully in the language of concern, delivered by someone who knows exactly what they're doing even if they'd never admit it to themselves. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. Have you noticed how the people who apologize the least are often the ones who get away with the most? How the ones who say, you're overreacting, the fastest are usually the ones who know precisely how much ground they've already taken. That isn't coincidence. That's a strategy, whether or not the person running it could ever describe it that plainly out loud. Here's the harsh truth nobody says directly. People who manipulate don't fear your kindness. They were counting on it before they even opened their mouth. They don't worry about your patience, because patience is the raw material they're working with. What they fear is your clarity. What unsettles them is your memory. The instant you can name what's happening while it's still happening, in real time, the entire tool stops functioning, because manipulation only works in the gap between the act and your recognition of it. You think staying endlessly agreeable keeps your relationship safe. It doesn't. It makes you a known, mapped, predictable quantity, and predictable quantities are the easiest ones to exploit repeatedly without consequence. You think giving people the benefit of the doubt earns you honesty in return. It doesn't. It selects for the exact people who need your doubt in order to keep operating, and filters out almost nobody else. You think never confronting anyone builds you a reputation as easygoing, low drama, safe to be around. It does build that reputation. It's simply the wrong one to have, because it advertises exactly the wrong thing to exactly the wrong audience. Manipulators are rarely cruel in the cartoonish way villains are written to be cruel. Often, disturbingly often, they believe their own version of events completely, right up until it becomes inconvenient to believe it. That's precisely what makes them effective, and it's exactly why you can never rely on catching some obvious tell, some shifty look, some cartoon villain moment. You have to learn the underlying structure of the behavior, not just wait to recognize the actor. Picture the scene, because you've likely already lived some version of it. Someone shifts blame onto you in the middle of a conversation, smoothly, almost casually, and somehow you end up explaining your own feelings back to them like your feelings are the actual problem on the table. Someone makes a promise, quietly fails to deliver on it, and somehow you're the one softening the moment, reassuring them that it's fine, that you understand, that these things happen. Someone benefits directly from your silence and later calls that silence loyalty, as if you chose it freely instead of being maneuvered into it one small concession at a time. None of this happens because you're weak. None of it happens because you're stupid. It happens because nobody ever taught you the shape of the pattern, only the isolated incidents, which always look smaller and more excusable one at a time than they do laid end to end. And once you finally see the shape clearly, laid end to end, you can't unsee it again. It becomes visible everywhere, in situations you'd have walked past without a second thought a year earlier. The damage always begins in the same place, the belief that having good intentions functions as a defense against being used. It doesn't, and it never did. Manipulation isn't stopped by being a good person. Good people get manipulated constantly, more than most others, precisely because their instinct is to assume good faith on the other side of the table. Manipulation is stopped by being an aware one, by someone who has actually studied the mechanics instead of relying on decency as armor. People who manipulate don't wake up each morning with a master plan to deceive you specifically. They learn, gradually and almost passively, who checks a story and who simply doesn't. Every time you accept an explanation that doesn't quite add up, because confronting the gap feels exhausting or petty or not worth the tension, you teach them that inconsistency costs nothing with you. Every time you talk yourself out of a feeling because someone insists, calmly and confidently, that you've misread the entire situation, you hand them the pen to rewrite reality the next time too, and the time after that, until rewriting reality around you becomes routine. Marcus Aurelius spent a great deal of his private writing reminding himself, almost obsessively, to see things exactly as they are rather than as they're being presented to him by other people with their own interests at stake. That's the entire discipline in a single sentence. Not distrust for its own sake. Clarity. Seeing the actual transaction happening underneath the comfortable story being told about it. Here's the harsher reality underneath that one. People don't remember, in the end, how understanding you were toward them. They remember whether their version of events held up under any real scrutiny, or whether it simply slid through because nobody bothered to look closely. And when it's never looked at closely, something quietly dangerous starts to form on their side of the relationship. They stop treating you like an independent witness with your own judgment, and they start treating you like an audience whose reactions need to be managed and steered, not respected. You become useful to somebody else's narrative rather than respected as a check on it. And usefulness without discernment is precisely the outcome a manipulator is optimizing for from the very first interaction, whether they'd phrase it that clinically to themselves or not. A guilt trip you never name out loud for what it is. You're too sensitive, that you quietly absorb and repeat to yourself later as if it were simply true. A story that shifts slightly, almost imperceptibly, each time you hear it retold, which you let slide because pointing out the shift feels petty, feels like keeping score, feels beneath you somehow. You tell yourself you're being mature, being the bigger person. What you're actually doing, every single time, is removing the one thing that makes manipulation expensive to run, the real possibility of being caught and named. Seneca warned about exactly this long before modern psychology gave it a clinical name. His observation, in essence, was that the man too eager to accept any explanation without friction invites deception, not because questioning someone is unkind or paranoid, but because unexamined explanations quietly teach people that lying to you carries no real cost, ever, under any circumstance. Manipulation depends on one single mechanism above everything else, your willingness to doubt your own perception faster than you doubt their explanation of it. That's the whole engine underneath all of it. Not elaborate lies. Not sophisticated schemes. Self-doubt, engineered patiently, one small concession at a time, until your own read on reality feels less reliable than someone else's confident narration of it. The moment you start questioning your own perception before you question their account, you've already handed over the controls, often without ever noticing the handoff happen. And here's the part almost everyone misses until it's far too late to address cheaply. Manipulation doesn't announce itself with a warning label. It compounds quietly, in the background, month after month, until one day the pattern is so obvious to everyone standing outside it that you feel a genuine flash of embarrassment for not having seen it sooner yourself. By that point, untangling the whole thing costs you 10 times what noticing it early, on day one, would have cost. This is exactly why the real skill was never, be more trusting, or its lazy opposite, be more suspicious of everyone. The actual skill is noticing the gap, every single time without exception, between what someone says and what they actually, verifiably do. That gap, and only that gap, is where every form of manipulation lives and breathes. Here's where most people get the entire subject wrong from the start. They assume being manipulated is fundamentally about being unintelligent. It isn't, not even close. It's about being unpracticed in a specific, learnable skill. Smart, careful, genuinely thoughtful people get manipulated constantly, arguably more than most, precisely because manipulation as a craft is engineered specifically to route around intelligence and go straight for empathy instead, which intelligence alone does nothing to protect. Every time you excuse an inconsistency because the person delivering it seems sincere, seems to really mean it, you're quietly training your own judgment to weigh sincerity over hard evidence. Every time you let a heartfelt apology substitute for an actual change in behavior, you send yourself a private message that words alone are sufficient. And the moment words become sufficient in your own internal accounting, actions quietly stop being required of anyone at all. This is exactly why people say afterward, in genuine disbelief, staring back at the wreckage, I don't understand how I didn't see it. They seemed so genuine the entire time. Exactly. Genuine is not the same thing as honest, no matter how similar the two feel in the moment. Genuine is a performance skill, one that some people have simply practiced far longer and more deliberately than you have. Honest is a track record, verifiable over time, and only over time. The Stoics put this plainly enough: men judge far more by appearances than by substance, simply because appearance is what stands directly in front of them, immediate and easy to process, while substance takes real effort and real time to verify properly. Manipulators understand this instinctively, almost as a first language, even without ever having read a word of theory on the subject. Your job, if you actually want to stop being a reliable target, is to make substance your default filter for people, not your fallback option after appearances have already failed you. If any of this feels uncomfortable to sit with right now, good. That discomfort means you're finally seeing the underlying mechanism clearly, instead of only ever seeing the individual actors who happen to be running it on you at any given moment. Because next comes the part that doesn't just change how other people treat you over time. It changes how you treat yourself, quietly, from the inside, and that is where the real, lasting damage actually begins. Pause here for a second, honestly. If you're still reading this closely, you're already not like most people encountering this idea for the first time. Most people quit the moment a topic like this stops feeling comfortable to sit inside. They scroll past. They distract themselves with something easier. You stayed. And that tells me something specific about you. You felt some version of this before, more than once, and you simply never had precise language for naming it until now. Here's the harshest truth in the entire subject. Being manipulated repeatedly doesn't just cost you money, or time, or a specific relationship you can point to afterward. It slowly, patiently erases your trust in your own read on reality itself. Not overnight, and rarely dramatically. It happens in small moments you privately dismiss each time as, probably nothing. You start rehearsing conversations in your head before they even happen, just so you can't be caught off guard by someone who's proven unreliable before. You start writing things down, not because you're naturally organized, but because you no longer fully trust your own memory around certain specific people. You start feeling a small, sharp flicker of unease in real time, and you immediately talk yourself out of it, telling yourself that's probably not what they actually meant by that. Every single time you override that flicker instead of examining it, something inside you goes a little quieter, a little more compliant, a little less certain of its own authority. The moment you delay questioning something that genuinely doesn't add up, you signal quite clearly that your attention can be redirected on demand, and redirected again later without much resistance. And once that particular signal has been sent once and received clearly, it gets used deliberately, and used again. Epictetus argued that real improvement requires being willing to be thought difficult, overly cautious, even paranoid, by precisely the people who benefit most from you never looking too closely at their behavior. Most people fear being labeled too much, far more than they actually fear being quietly controlled over time. So they drop the question before it's fully formed. They accept the first explanation offered. They apologize, sincerely, for having noticed something real in the first place. And slowly, without any single dramatic moment marking the decline, discernment atrophies like any other unused skill. Not because you lack the underlying intelligence for it, but because real discernment requires ongoing friction, and unpracticed trust avoids friction at absolutely every available opportunity, choosing comfort instead, every single time it's offered. Here's a scenario you'll almost certainly recognize from your own life. At first, someone is careful and consistent with you, warm and easy to believe without much effort on your part. Then, at some point, they notice something useful. You don't check anything. You don't ask the obvious second question. You accept the first explanation offered, every single time, without exception. So they quietly relax their own effort. The story gets a little looser around the edges. The inconsistencies grow larger and more obvious. And you still don't check, because checking now, this late in the pattern, would mean privately admitting you probably should have checked much earlier. The Stoics warned that when people sense clearly that no real verification is coming their way, they lose whatever restraint they were previously exercising. Restraint, in any relationship, is precisely what keeps manipulation contained and limited, and restraint only ever holds up reliably under active scrutiny, never on its own. Why do the people who prove hardest to manipulate often seem, on the surface, almost unreadable or oddly reserved? Why do they tend to ask quiet, specific, pointed questions instead of reacting emotionally to whatever's presented to them? Because specificity itself creates real friction, and friction is precisely the one thing manipulation as a craft cannot survive contact with for very long. People who get manipulated easily tend to over-explain their own private doubts out loud, in real time, which conveniently hands the manipulator exactly the information needed to smooth those doubts back over immediately. They over-apologize for the simple act of questioning something, which quietly trains the other person that any resistance offered is only ever temporary. They over-trust the accumulated history of the relationship itself, forgetting entirely that history is not remotely the same thing as the present moment currently in front of them. Now sit with the genuinely painful question underneath all of this. How many relationships, deals, friendships, or working partnerships have quietly gone wrong over time without any dramatic confrontation ever marking the moment? No shouting, no single decisive reveal, just a slow, steady unease that you talked yourself out of repeatedly, again and again, until the damage had already fully accumulated behind the scenes. You told yourself, each time, that you were probably just being paranoid. You weren't. You were noticing, accurately, in real time. You simply never trusted your own noticing enough to act on it. Epictetus's underlying point applies with equal force here. If you genuinely want clarity in your relationships, you have to be willing to be thought difficult by exactly the people who need you to remain easy in order to keep operating freely. But most people, understandably, want to be seen as trusting, as easygoing, as generally low maintenance to be around. So they make themselves easy to move through, repeatedly, without much resistance. And easy things, by their very nature, don't get protected over time. They get used, steadily, until there's nothing left worth using. This is precisely why careful, thoughtful people often feel genuinely blindsided later on, not because they weren't paying any attention at all, but because they were carefully paying attention to the performance being staged in front of them, rather than to the underlying pattern running quietly beneath it the entire time. Ask yourself this directly. If someone lied to you clearly tomorrow, would you catch it accurately in the actual moment it happened, or only much later, in hindsight, weeks or months afterward, slowly piecing the whole thing together after the fact? If your honest answer is, only in hindsight, if ever, this isn't really about bad luck following you around. It's about a specific skill that was simply never built. And here's the sharper, less comfortable truth underneath that: the world doesn't reliably reward good faith all on its own, no matter how sincere it is. It reliably rewards good faith only when it's paired directly with active verification. Good faith with zero verification attached to it has, functionally, no real defense built into it at all. If you take only one thing away from all of this, Let it be this single idea: learning to recognize manipulation accurately does not make you cynical, bitter, or hardened toward the world. It makes you accurate. And accuracy is real protection in a world where sincerity itself can be performed convincingly, on demand, by people who've had considerable practice doing exactly that. Here's something worth sitting with directly. If blind, unverified trust actually worked reliably as a long-term life strategy, the most capable, most successful people across history would have relied on it heavily as their primary approach. They didn't. Almost universally, they built active discernment early, deliberately, often through hard and expensive experience. The Stoics were blunt about this too, warning clearly that a man who stakes his entire security on the goodwill of others has effectively handed his own fate over to people who may not deserve to hold it at all. People generally don't bother manipulating careful, genuinely aware men, not because those men are somehow unkind or closed off, but because those men have made it unmistakably clear that questioning something feels far less costly to them than being deceived by it would. Powerful, grounded people understand something that unpracticed people consistently avoid facing directly: trust was never meant to be the simple absence of verification. Real trust is verification that keeps passing the test, reliably, over time, under genuine scrutiny. Here's what actually separates the man who reads a room accurately from the man who consistently gets read by others instead. The first decides clearly what evidence he actually needs before he commits to anything meaningful, rather than hoping quietly that the story will hold up on its own later. The second simply accepts whatever story is offered because rejecting it, even briefly, feels genuinely uncomfortable in that specific moment. The first is entirely willing to be called untrusting by someone who happens to have something real to hide. The second panics quietly at the mere thought of being disliked and abandons his own clear instincts immediately to avoid the discomfort. The first asks the obvious second question, calmly and directly. The second lets the first vague, incomplete answer close the entire subject prematurely. This is the real cost you've been quietly paying, possibly for years without naming it clearly. Every time you accepted an explanation that didn't fully line up, simply because pushing further felt socially awkward in the moment, you taught someone specific that your attention has a firm limit and exactly where that limit sits. Every time you chose momentary comfort over asking one more clarifying question, you signaled clearly that sustained pressure works reliably on you. Every time you quietly apologized for having noticed something that was actually real and accurate, you told someone directly that their preferred story is safer, in your own mind, than your own honest judgment. The Stoics never taught outright paranoia as a way of life. They taught realism, carefully and consistently. They understood clearly that the world does not automatically reward innocence purely on its own merits. It reliably rewards awareness paired directly with restraint, together, not separately. And genuine awareness demands one uncomfortable thing above everything else: you have to be willing to actually look closely, every time, even in the specific moments when looking away would clearly be easier and far more comfortable. Because the exact moment you start looking closely, really looking at consistent patterns instead of comfortable promises, at verifiable behavior instead of confident explanations, something meaningful shifts around you. People adjust their own behavior differently in your presence. Not because you became suspicious of absolutely everyone around you indiscriminately, but because you became genuinely unreadable to anyone who was quietly hoping you wouldn't bother checking closely at all. Marcus Aurelius wrote repeatedly about respecting your own perception enough to stop talking yourself out of it purely for someone else's momentary comfort. That's the entire practice, distilled down to its core. Not becoming hard or closed off toward people. Becoming precise, consistently, over time, in how you actually observe them. Now ask yourself one final, genuinely uncomfortable question. How many times have you extended someone the benefit of the doubt they clearly hadn't earned yet, simply because doubting them openly, even briefly, felt unkind or rude in that specific moment? You don't need to become guarded toward everyone. You don't need to become cold or distant in your relationships generally. But you do need to stop mistaking your own discomfort with confrontation for solid evidence that you were somehow wrong to notice what you noticed in the first place. Stop quietly apologizing for asking the second question. Stop trading away your own hard-won clarity for someone else's momentary comfort in the room. The world doesn't actually run primarily on good intentions, however sincerely held. It runs, in practice, on who's genuinely paying close attention and who simply isn't. Most men never fully learn any of this, not because the information itself is hidden or difficult to find, but because it's genuinely uncomfortable to admit, even privately, that they've been read and used before, possibly more than once, by people they trusted completely. They stay broadly agreeable. They stay quiet in moments that call for a direct question. And then, later, they quietly wonder why the exact same underlying pattern keeps finding them again, wearing a slightly different face each time. Now you have an actual choice sitting in front of you. You either keep accepting the first explanation offered, every time, because it's more comfortable in the moment, or you become someone whose attention genuinely can't be talked out of what it already noticed clearly, regardless of how skillfully the story gets retold to you afterward. If any part of this exposed something real in you while reading it, don't quietly ignore that reaction and move on. Sit with it directly. Share this with someone you know who keeps extending people the benefit of the doubt they clearly haven't earned yet. It might genuinely be the wake-up call they've needed for a long time. See you in the next one.